Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Jane Harmon, the president and CEO of the Wilson Center and a recovering politician. General Allen says I haven't recovered. It's probably true. It's not a 12-step program, but we're delighted to host him here today. I first met General John Allen while I was leading a congressional delegation to Guantanamo prison. We stopped first, the CODEL stopped first at CENTCOM to see my good friend Dave Petraeus, who was then our CENTCOM commander. General Allen was Dave's deputy. We sat next to each other at dinner, and boy, was I impressed. And he's continued to impress. First rising from deputy commander to acting commander after Dave left to head ISAF, and then taking command of ISAF himself when Dave moved to the CIA. His is a hell of a resume. General Allen spearheaded some tough missions in uniform, but he's led two of his toughest out of it. Organizing an international effort as Special Presidential Envoy to the Global Coalition Against ISIL, and keeping Israeli-Palestinian peace discussions warm, that's his word, on the security side. When the history of the last few years is written, I hope there will be something positive to say about what's been achieved in the Middle East. If there is, major credit will be due to General John Allen, and we're thrilled to have him at the Wilson Center today. The plan is to ask General Allen to make some opening remarks. I will then ask him a few questions, and then we'll take audience questions. What's missing here is that little clock that shows me the time so that I make sure we keep this event to an hour. We may have a cameraman in front of the clock, but someone will figure that out. General Allen, welcome.
Jane, thank you very much for that introduction. I'll seek to live up to the standards and the comments that you've made. But let me first start by addressing your comment about being a recovering politician. Regardless of how you would describe yourself, I think all of us who know you and who have seen you in action in this town, regardless of whether you depict yourself as a politician or anything else, we all view you as a leader, a forever leader, someone who will influence the discussion in this town for many years to come, hopefully for all of us, for those, and also someone who has touched many of our lives and frankly made us better for your participation and for your presence in our lives. And I can't thank you enough, and I think I speak for thousands of people who have had an opportunity to interact with you and are better people for it. As well, thank you for your leadership here at the Wilson Center. As we walk down the steps coming in here, you were telling me about Woodrow Wilson and the magnificence of his vision and how it is enshrined in this center. And this particular institution, I believe, is an engine for thought that creates an opportunity for all of us to be better and for this administration and the other branches of government to learn by watching and listening closely to what's going on inside the four walls of this institution. So thank you for that. It's difficult to find a particular starting point to represent the role that I play in this particular crisis. I had the great opportunity to have served in Iraq, and it was a difficult time, a little bit in '06, all in '07 and part of '08, where I had the chance to see a crisis in a very personal way and to work very closely, not just with the emerging Iraqi and provincial governments, but also to work very closely with the tribes and the sheikhs and to understand some of the dynamics and the true complexities that are the inherent reality of working in Iraq or working more broadly in the Middle East. And so when I received a call not long ago as to whether I would take this position, I called my wife and we had a conversation. I was well entrenched in retirement, making a little bit of money, and we both agreed that the 4,500 of our young Americans who never made it out of Iraq alive was a reason for me to take this position. and the thousands who were wounded and the families that will ultimately bear the price and the consequence of that. So I do what I do and try to do what I do, not just to be of help to the President and to the administration, but also to make their sacrifice meaningful, and that's important to me. The role that I play in this particular crisis is to work with the coalition and to work within the strategy for the implementation of the strategy, but primarily within the coalition to do three principal things. The first is to help to consolidate the coalition of the many states that are involved, 62 separate countries, a number of international organizations who have come together because they all in common believe that the crisis of ISIL, and I'll use the term Daesh throughout this presentation, that the crisis of Daesh is a crisis for our time. It's a crisis within the region, and it's not just an issue associated solely with Syria or with the potential fragmentation of Iraq. It is a crisis that can come home to all of us in the context of foreign fighters, and we talked a bit about that and the reality of foreign fighters last night. So as we have gone through the process of consolidating the membership of the coalition, and I believe we're generally there at this point, although there will be coalition members who will still seek to become, or members who will seek to become members of the coalition, but also there will be those at some point who will probably depart the coalition. We're generally there. The second thing I do is to seek to integrate the contributions of the members of the coalition into the strategy. And in that context, as we said in a previous conversation, the strategy with regard to the coalition generally falls along 5 lines of operation. The first of those is the military line. It is the one that is receiving the greatest attention today. It is the one that is most conspicuous, and it, in broad terms, has 2 components to it. One is the current air campaign, which is intended to blunt and reverse the momentum of Daesh and set the conditions ultimately for the other very large portion of the mission, which is the building of partner capacity to give the Iraqis and ultimately the moderate Syrian opposition elements capability ultimately to deal with Daesh in the battle space. Very broad and imprecise explanations, and we can get into greater detail about that if you desire. The other 4 lines of effort in which coalition partners are playing very heavily, and they receive less attention, and it's important to understand that these are prominent investments of national prestige and treasure and blood, is the effort by the coalition to deal with foreign fighters. Foreign fighters are something we're going to live with for a long time. Foreign fighters originate for a particular reason in source countries, and as they generally are recruited mostly through social media, they can be recruited, indoctrinated, and targeted, and sometimes not even have to leave the home country. So we are working together to deal with the recruitment of foreign fighters, their transit from source countries, across borders using international transportation, the mechanisms by which they are able to find themselves into Syria and Iraq and frankly in other places. And ultimately what we do as a community of nations, but specifically by virtue of our internal efforts, what we do to react to them when they come back. There has been, I think, some very good work that has been done by individual states and international organizations to highlight the problem of foreign fighters, but also take both executive and legislative action domestically to deal with the problem. And we're going to be dealing with foreign fighters for a long time. The third area is in the area of understanding and beginning to squeeze and disrupt the revenue streams that give Daesh the ability to conduct its operations. And they generally fall into several areas. I think the one that is most conspicuous, the one that receives a lot of attention is the area of the oil enterprise, from where it comes out of the ground to its refinement, the refining process, the development of products, the transportation of products, the black market sale and the illicit enterprise that is associated with the distribution generation of cash, the use of certain bank branches, and the connection of those banks into the international financial system. Understanding the supply chain and understanding the nervous system, if you will, of the oil enterprise has been something of great importance to us, and we have dedicated some significant intelligence assets to it to begin to understand it in a way where we can start to take it apart. Other areas where Daesh is able to generate revenues is in, if you will, the coercive criminal activities that it inflicts on the populations over which it has sway, and which those populations which live in its area of occupation. In essence, it is plundering the population that it rules at this particular moment. As well, Daesh is involved in kidnap for ransom. We've seen the horrendous outcomes of that, but a great deal of revenue is generated at a much lower level, where the sons and daughters and prominent individuals throughout that region are kidnapped and are sold back into families, or sold back to tribes, or sold back to organizations at not an insignificant amount, and it generates a good bit of money. And of course, Daesh is now engaged in the year 2014 in an active slave trade. And you know, I think sometimes we have been so exposed to this organization that in some respects, and I don't believe that anyone necessarily in this audience would be, but sometimes people become desensitized to how horrendous this organization truly is, and what it has done to the people that it has conquered, and what it is prepared to do to the other people that it is prepared to conquer. And for an organization not just to be engaged in slave trade, but to celebrate the fact that it is doing it, just has to continue to be one of the motivating factors for why this is such an important undertaking. Tragically, all of those things together are tragic enough, but Daesh is generating not an insignificant amount of money by selling the antiquities of Syria and in other areas where they have been able to plunder archaeological sites and museums and so on. And then finally, there are foreign contributions that have been helpful to Daesh, although we think that amount is reduced, largely because Daesh, through the plundering of banks, the criminal activities, the oil enterprise, has permitted it in some respects to be nearly self-financing. A fourth area is the area of humanitarian assistance, and this is one that must be part of our attention. It is one that the coalition, I think, has been hugely helpful in helping us to reduce the misery and the human suffering for the large population that has been affected in the Middle East writ large, but very specifically in Syria and Iraq. Very importantly, helping the populations, the refugee populations in the frontline states of Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, and they deserve great credit for the generosity and the care and the humanitarian nature of what they have done for much of this population. But also, of course, beyond answering the UN appeals for Syria and Iraq, helping countries in the region deal with the large, really substantial refugee populations, will have to be keenly attuned to the immediate humanitarian needs of the populations which will be liberated in the course of the counteroffensive, which we would anticipate in 2015, at least in Iraq. And in many cases, beyond the generosity, frankly, and I'm very proud of the generosity of the United States in contributing to the humanitarian piece of this, the elements of the coalition have been also equally, within their means, generous, both to the UN and to other international organizations to help to end this suffering. And then the fifth area in which the coalition is deeply involved, and it is one that is really essential to the success of the strategy, is dealing with the image of Daesh. And it's really a two-sided coin. The first is to go about the business of delegitimizing the organization, exposing it for what it is, pointing out the massive flaws, its horrendous conduct and behavior, with the idea of compromising its attractiveness for the purposes of recruiting, to diminish it within its own ranks, the sense that it has an inevitable outcome with a caliphate that will endure in the region, and it won't. But the other side of the same coin, as I said, is an opportunity to celebrate those societal values and the values of the faith of Islam primarily that deserve ultimately to be highlighted and in the context that they exist in direct contravention to that which Daesh stands for. So it's not just important that we delegitimize the movement of Daesh, it's equally as important that we celebrate the values of this marvelous faith, celebrate the values inherent to the cultures of the region, and in the inherent nature and the relationship, that complementary effort, seek ultimately to assault and to do away with or to diminish the idea of Daesh at the same time. So the coalition has come together. The members of the coalition are actively contributing across these 5 lines of effort. We're working very hard with our coalition partners within the context of the strategy to bring to bear the full capabilities of the coalition ultimately to accomplish the strategy. And now we move to the third principal area in which I'm engaged, which is the coalition coordination and coalition management. As the coalition has come together, one of the most important events that we have seen, I think it's important to recognize that the coalition really only started to come together about 3 months ago, and then 2.5 months ago we determined it would be a coalition. So in the course of about 10 weeks or so, we have gone from a group of states that have a common vision for what needs to be done with Daesh to an organic organization which met just last Wednesday in Brussels at the ministerial level, led by Secretary Kerry and a number of international organizations where the ministers of 47 of the countries of the 62 joined all of those members, all of the states, in commenting on the strategy and commenting on the lines of effort in committing their national purpose and their national resources and assets to this common endeavor that we have all undertaken, which is ultimately the degradation and the defeat of Daesh. That's an important moment, and when you consider, from my own experience, this is, I've been involved in a number of coalitions, I think this is my 5th. When you think about how we operated in the context of the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan, there was a clear legal international basis for that flowed from a United Nations Security Council resolution, but there was also an international framework, a recognizable framework in the context of NATO and the North Atlantic Council, which gave us that framework to meet periodically for the very important process of political consultation. Neither of those are present in this coalition. And to see it come together this way, to see us meet at the ministerial level in this manner, to hear the really profound words of the ministers and the leaders last Wednesday and their commitment to this cause, and the importance of an ongoing political consultation where we've come in about 3 months is really important. 6 months ago yesterday is when Mosul fell. 6 months ago yesterday was when we all wondered whether this was the beginning of the end of Iraq. And so from that moment to this, much has happened. Many things have occurred. We believe that the strategic and the operational momentum of Daesh has been halted. We believe that at the tactical level, while there will still be the trading of some ground back and forth, that the initial efforts by the Iraqi security forces, supported by advisors from within the coalition, but ultimately the Iraqi security forces, which will be trained in our training program, which will kick off relatively shortly. We believe that will begin the process of reversing the momentum ultimately in Iraq and to restore the territorial integrity of Iraq, the sovereignty of Iraq, as we continue the process at the same time of working with the moderate Syrian opposition, not just at a political level, but very importantly in the field. So let me just stop there. Those, I think, offer some overarching perspectives on the role that I play. And again, it's an honor to be associated with this. I can't overstate how grateful we are for our coalition partners in joining us in this undertaking. And again, Jane, thank you for your leadership in letting us to come together today to have this conversation.
Well, thank you, General. I think the entire audience wants to thank you for your service and your continued service and the service of your wife and family. Listening to you talk about what you've gotten done in 10 weeks prompts me to ask, when this assignment successfully concludes, should President Obama ask you to take over Obamacare?
Why don't we schedule that for another session?
All right. Well, turning to some questions, obviously based on your comments, you talked about first in the first of 5 lines, military, the military campaign. You said you hope to build partner capacity. Now, we've all read about the training. In fact, Congress was involved in the mission in the effort to fund a training mission for a limited number of people. What is the potential for partner capacity, and could that capacity really be the so-called military boots on the ground that everyone keeps talking about?
The answer needs to be segmented a bit. When you talk in terms of a campaign of this nature, you often hear the operational term, a main effort, a supporting effort, a shaping effort. Sometimes when you hear the campaign depicted or portrayed, you'll hear it as an Iraq first and a Syria second. That's too stark a depiction. What is happening, because we're dealing with Daesh across boundaries, because we view Daesh as a threat to 2 countries in particular, but a region more broadly, and to the international community by virtue of its reach and direct and indirect influence. It's important to say that the main effort of the campaign for the moment is in Iraq, and that main effort not only is dedicated or directed at an attack on the Daesh formations and the Daesh nervous system, if you will, but it also is complemented, very importantly, by this building of partner capacity. That's an inherent part of the strategy. It has been the reason that the numbers of our troops and coalition troops are increasing in Iraq, is to provide the basis for the building of partner capacity. Iraq has a recognizable government in terms of the context of having a political partner. There is a new and hopeful presence in Baghdad in the form of Prime Minister Abadi. It's also important as we judge the progress that is occurring in Baghdad. It's also important to understand that that government has only been complete for 60 days, 2 months. It's the first time there's been a full government in Baghdad since 2010. It's the first time we've seen a Minister of Defense and a Minister of Interior. And in the context of Prime Minister Abadi's having been appointed to the position of Prime Minister only since the 8th of September, I think we can all be pleased with the direction that Iraq seems to go. So we have a political partner. The relationship is evolving. His government is evolving. He is ultimately will have to take full appreciation of the many, many challenges that he has to face in the aftermath of the Maliki regime, but also the challenges that 1/3 of the country basically is in the hands of Daesh, that much of the security mechanism collapsed in the process. So this is a gentleman who we know well, a government that is taking shape. It faces economic difficulties as well as political challenges and security challenges, a full platter for this individual. Supporting him at the political level is the work that we have to do on the security front to go about the business of restoring the territorial integrity of Iraq and providing back to the central government and to the regional governments, the provincial governments, the capacity for full sovereignty. And that is where the building partner capacity occurs. There are some Iraqi security force elements that remained intact in the aftermath of Mosul back in June. Those units are being assisted now in limited tactical operations against Daesh in key areas. They are setting the conditions for additional activity later. For example, and I won't go through the whole list, but Kurdish forces were supported by direct air support in pushing Daesh off of the Mosul Dam. I think we all know that that would have been a potential catastrophe downstream had they been able to hold onto the Mosul Dam. It's now firmly in the hands of the Kurds, and they've done a magnificent job in taking it. Similarly, we reduced the pressure. Daesh was intent on taking the Haditha Dam, so Mosul is on the Tigris, Haditha is on the Euphrates. Maintaining our control, our being Iraqi control of that strategic infrastructure was really imperative. The Iraqis were able to hold on with American support, and now the pressure on the Haditha Dam has been relieved. The Iraqis attacked up Route 1 and ultimately relieved the refining center at Beji, which had been encircled and cut off and was besieged in the spring and summer offensive, which has just been relieved by an Iraqi security force column that has worked its way up Route 1 and has now taken possession of this enormously important hydrocarbon center in Iraq. And there are many others. For example, Iraqis were dropping supplies to the Yazidis on Sinjar Mountain. Iraqis were dropping supplies out of Iraqi C-130s on the population in Sinjar Mountain. So these are limited activities at this point as we establish the training camps in the four particular areas in Iraq, which is in Al-Anbar province, in Taji, in Erbil, in Kurdistan, and in south of Baghdad. That begins the process of the retraining and reinvigoration of the Iraqi forces that will enter into the fight. Similarly, we're beginning to establish the training camps elsewhere in the region where moderate Syrian opposition elements will be trained as well. That's the significant support that we received from the Congress.
And that's the harder problem.
It is the harder problem because the partnership that we enjoy in Iraq, very clear partnership that we enjoy in Iraq at a political level, at a security level, at a governmental level, it's not as apparent, nor is it as far advanced or developed. So determining our partners, ensuring that in the process of recruiting, the vetting occurs in a proper manner, the training and the supporting of them overall, that's a challenge for us, and we're only now getting the camps to come to fruition.
Right, and you mentioned Syria, which is obviously a hard problem since we don't have a relationship with the Syrian government, but the aspirations of ISIL or Daesh are way beyond Iraq and Syria. I mean, we've seen incursions into Syria's neighbors, but is it not also possible that they would want the headquarters of their so-called Islamic State to be in Mecca? Wouldn't some kind of a huge regional reach be at least something we should be thinking about?
It's something we are thinking about. We think about it every single day, and we'd obviously have to ask Abu Dua or Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi what his ultimate objectives are. But we are very attentive to, while we conduct this operation, we're very attentive to containing Daesh's spread beyond the area of operation in which we're continuing the campaign at this particular moment. It's also important to recognize that not only may they have additional contiguous aspirations, contiguous in the context of countries that are on the borders of Iraq and Syria, and I think we know that they do. It's very important as well that we are keeping close tabs on other groups that may swear fealty ultimately to Baghdadi and to Abu Dua and to the organization, which then gives them, in essence, a franchise reach into other areas of the globe as far away as East Asia. We have seen, and thankfully the national police in Australia were able to thwart the intention to kidnap random tourists and behead them in Sydney. So we have to be very attentive to, through social media and through other means of communications, the long reach of Daesh beyond the simple terrestrial reach within the context of contiguous states. So we're attentive to Saudi Arabia, we're attentive to the equilibrium in Jordan, certainly in Turkey and Lebanon, and we watch it very closely.
And I would just underscore Yemen. If there really were an affiliation between AQAP and Daesh, and the tools that the bomb maker in Yemen is able to produce got in the hands of Daesh, that could obviously enhance that's a terrible word.
Accelerate is perhaps another word.
Accelerate is a better word. It's lethality.
Well, for the moment, we know that there is a really substantial tension between Daesh as an entity and Al-Qaeda as an entity, and heaven that we would ever believe that either of those two guys could become the good guy in this relationship. That Al-Qaeda has broken from Daesh in important ways, and so long as they are unable ultimately to see a common future and a common road that they can walk together, that works to our advantage.
Yeah, I would say, let me just return to Congress for a moment. Congress did, on a bipartisan basis, fund the training mission for so-called moderate elements in Syria, training to occur in Saudi Arabia. Congress is about, at least I would hope, to pass a budget for this coming year, the so-called Cromnibus, marvelous name. It funds the Wilson Center, so thank you, Congress, in part. But also, Congress has to fund the humanitarian assistance that you're talking about, at least the U.S. piece of that. And so my question is, how's that going? Are there things that Congress should be doing that it's not doing? And do you think that the bipartisan cooperation, I'm always an optimist here, that occurred on the funding bill for the training mission could continue? I mean, it certainly occurs to me that the terrorists aren't going to check our party registration before they blow us up. You've talked about the fact that the way the social media campaign works does reach people in their homes and basements and computer cafes, and does radicalize people, I would assume, including in this country. So we have to think about this not just as a foreign mission to protect an entire region, but as a mission to protect the United States.
It would be difficult for me to overstate how pleased I have been to see how the Congress has reacted to this. I don't comment on the political dimension or the bipartisanship. It's not for me to do that. But I will tell you that I've had the opportunity now to speak to a number of members of Congress. I come away from every one of those experiences, whether it's at the committee level or an entire House, convinced that we all share a common sense of the challenge, a common sense of the threat, and a common desire to act decisively and appropriately to deal with it. So we're very grateful for the support of the Congress in the support to the train and equip mission. Very grateful to the Congress for continuing to support the humanitarian nature. And I think we all have an obligation in this process to continue to talk to Congress, to inform the members, to help them to understand what it is we're doing, to help them to understand the nature of the crisis, to inform the Congress, and through the Congress to inform the American people. And to this point, we're very grateful for what the Congress has done to help us in this regard.
Well, I would just add that my own view that I think there are very good people and leaders in Congress in both parties, and it is just imperative that the administration and obviously you call on their talents, because everyone's needed in this enormous
There's been no
fight.
reluctance to offer their support, and I think this is an opportunity for us to create opportunities for communication that I think can help us to really remedy this emergency.
Just a final question, and then we'll go to the audience. And when we do, please identify yourself and ask a question. No speeches, because a lot of people, I'm sure, want to talk. I mentioned you had a second mission, and that was keeping the security dimensions of the Israel-Palestine negotiations warm. What hour of what day do you have to spend on this mission, and how's that going?
Well, there's the week I retired, I got a call from John Kerry and asked if I would help in that regard. I'd had some background in that while I was still on active duty. And I consented because of my strong desire to, if I could ever have an influence in the process, to bring about a two-state outcome that provides both for Israel's security but also provides for a future for the Palestinian people. and I still do strongly, deeply believe that that's the outcome that is the only way ahead in the Middle East. Because I have a background in that area, because I knew the players on both sides, that began a process where over about 15, 16 months I traveled to the region about 13 or 14 times, met with Israeli counterparts, met with Palestinian counterparts, and we began the process of looking in a systematic way to do, as I said, preserve the security of Israel in a two-state outcome, but at the same time provide for the security of the Palestinian people in a sovereign state, and to do so in a manner which seeks to create not a divorce, but a partnership. And I think that process was well advanced, and obviously in the last several months we've seen that the political dimension of that process has really ceased for all intents and purposes for the moment. But our intent and our hope is to continue to talk about the potential security outcomes so that if the political process picks up again, we don't have to start this afresh. We've had the conversation about the region. We've had the conversation about the West Bank. We've had the conversation about how a long-term security relationship might look. And we just don't have to start all over again because, as we have seen many times, as the political process has sought to address these really difficult final status issues, the first part of the conversation at the political level is tell us how we solve the security piece.
Right.
Because we really can't go forward with the more in-depth conversation on the final status issues if we haven't solved the security piece. Well, we got well down the road in a trilateral way of addressing some of the more difficult security aspects of it. We didn't come to final closure, but we certainly came, I think, a long way down the road towards progress. And we don't want that to start all over again if we are fortunate enough to see the political process begin to catch fire again, and that's what we want.
Well, there will be changes in leadership, or there may be, because there are new elections in Israel, but I sure hope the leaders in the region are listening, because this would be
We do as well.
such a great contribution by them to the region.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, audience. So let me welcome a bit late the ambassadors from Finland, Italy, and Denmark. Thank you for coming. And then invite the audience to ask questions. If Michael Crowley is here, I wanted to call on him first. Is Michael Crowley here?
Hi.
There he is.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks so much, General, for coming today. I'm Michael Crowley with Politico. My question to you, General, is there has been recent reporting that you have been in conversations with the Turkish government about some kind of air exclusion or no-fly zone along the border. The White House evidently is not sold on this idea yet. Is there anything you can tell us about those conversations with the Turks and also here in Washington? More generally, what are you saying to moderate Syrian forces who may be asking, will American and coalition jets in the region come to our aid after we're sent into battle and we may be suffering extreme damage from Syrian regime forces? Will you come to our rescue if we're being barrel bombed and we can't defend ourselves? Thank you.
That's two questions. The conversation with the Turks has been actually quite constructive. I think it has evolved in ways, and I won't go into the details because the conversation is not over. I've been pleased with the trajectory of that conversation, and it's about not just the military dimension of how the Turks might participate in the coalition, but I think we all have to understand that Turkey is a frontline state. Turkey is currently hosting, numbers vary, but somewhere between 1.5 and 1.8 million refugees, and has done really good work on their behalf in a very compassionate way. The situation on the ground in Syria is a very difficult, complex, multi-layered situation. And the conversation with which we are currently engaged with the Turks seeks to understand that in a manner that permits us to have a common vision on the measures that we can take together, conceivably to further the objectives of the coalition. The conversation started some time ago in almost a preconditional way with the conversation of a no-fly zone. That the nature of that conversation has changed, and I'll just depict it as a constructive conversation. And I think if I had my Turkish counterpart sitting next to me, he would say it's a very constructive conversation as well. But it continues. It's not the moment to begin to talk about the specifics or the details, but that conversation continues, I think, in a constructive way. And I've personally seen it change to the benefit of both countries in the last couple of months. With regard to the Syrians, with regard to the moderate Syrian opposition, our conversation continues to evolve as well on how the campaign will take shape in Syria, the many ways in which we can both support the Free Syrians, or rather the moderate Syrian opposition in the field today, but also how we can support them over time. And that conversation has a variety of facets to it. That's not just about humanitarian support, not just about direct assistance, military assistance, and training assistance, but how the coalition might be helpful as well. So let me just stop there in terms of specificity.
Yeah. Let me invite you all to ask one question, and I'm next calling on
I'm not criticizing two questions, but sometimes it's one question in six parts. One time,
it's okay to
but
criticize
those were
Michael.
both very
He can
important
handle
questions,
it.
and thank you for
Haleh Esfandiari is the director of the Middle East program here. She's done groundbreaking writing on the treatment of women in the region. And we just 2 days ago hosted a meeting with a Yazidi member of parliament from Iraq, the only Yazidi member of parliament from Iraq, who was talking about the dire conditions. Haleh.
General Allen, the Vian Dakhil, the woman MP who was here, mentioned that there are 1,200 families still in the Sinjar mountain, roughly around between 6,000 and 7,000 people, and they haven't received much help from the Iraqi government. The Iraqi government has given them 4 helicopters for evacuating them, and each helicopter takes at any time 25 people. And it's winter, it's cold, they feel surrounded by ISIS, Daesh. Can the coalition do something to help these people?
There's actually been much more that's been done for them than just the activities of 4 helicopters. I don't have the exact number of sorties, but the Iraqi Air Force, the flying Iraqi C-130s, have dropped several tens of tons. I don't have the exact numbers, but we can get those for you. Tens of tons of supplies to those families on Sinjar Mountain. And we're working very closely with the Kurds and Kurdish forces to continue to provide support and security. We are, as we are able to find them, we are attacking Daesh positions in and around Sinjar with not insignificant effect in several of those attacks with respect to attacking command and control sites and troop concentrations where we find them. So the coalition is helping. I suspect that we will always say that more could be done, but in terms of what Iraq has done and what we are continuing to encourage that Iraq continue to do, not just to providing helicopters, but also providing airdrops, providing medical support where they're able to, and encouraging the activities of the Kurds who are also committed to helping. I think that there is perhaps more being done than necessarily is being depicted. But we'll continue to look at this. It's obviously an area where we're very heavily invested in the numbers of people that chose to remain on that mountain rather than to come off. And there are 4 particular points that attract our attention in terms of the concentrations of the families, and we'll continue to provide support as we can.
I would just add that you noted the slave trade, which is one of the funding sources for Daesh, and a lot of those slaves are women.
That's right.
Who are used as rewards for the conquering soldiers. Let's go, anyone in the back? I can't see that. The man right here in the vest then. I don't see anyone in the back.
Hi, I'm Phil Schrafer, retired international healthcare worker. also a Marine. I spent 3 years in active duty.
Semper Fi.
My question is to the General. Based on information I got at the School of Advanced International Studies, the Saudis play a somewhat complex role. You have the government, which is part of your coalition, our coalition, and then you have individual Saudis. I understand that individual Saudis are contributing money to ISIL when they were in Iraq and in their expansion as well. What's your understanding of that?
We've worked very closely with the Saudi government, and the Saudi government has been aggressive in working to reduce and even end that Saudi support for those groups. You're exactly correct. It is a complex relationship. They were here just yesterday as we continued to work on the strengthening and deepening our partnership with Saudi Arabia in this respect. Saudi aircraft flew alongside American Air Force aircraft in the first strike mission against Daesh targets in Syria and acquitted themselves quite well. I won't go into what the Saudis may be willing to say publicly, but they have been very helpful to us, not just in helping within the region to strike a blow against the legitimacy of Daesh, both in terms of clerics and public pronouncements of leadership. But the Saudis gave an early contribution of $500 million into humanitarian support, and have also been active in assisting. I'll let them speak to it publicly, but active in assisting us in the process of beginning to train the moderate Syrian opposition. So whether it's humanitarian assistance to the region in particular, specific provision of arms and equipment to elements that we're beginning to train, whether it's joining us in the air over Syria to attack directly Daesh targets, or taking domestic measures to staunch the flow of individual contributions to these extremist Salafist Takfiri organizations. I would simply say that Saudi Arabia has been very active in the context of the coalition and is looking to do more, and it's a very positive contribution.
Okay, right in the middle.
I'm Jim Reston, a scholar here at the Wilson Center. Could you elaborate a bit on your fifth point about the interface with worldwide Islam and tapping and mobilizing the horror of worldwide Islam towards this, and also attempting to undermine the notion that this crowd is a legitimate beginnings for a Islamic caliphate, this deep-seated longing for centuries. How do we undermine that notion that this crowd is legitimate holders of this idea?
Thank you, Jim.
I think one of the most important aspects of this undertaking is that we seek, and really more importantly, the region seeks to be the leading voices in this regard. The value of in the region of an American condemnation of Daesh often will ring very hollow with much of the region for a whole variety of reasons. We don't live there, we're not part of the social fabric, our history is different, our faith is different in many respects. And when you talk to the partners within the coalition who are of the region, what you hear very early in the conversation is that this is our fight. This is our crisis. Islam is our faith, and Daesh has hijacked our faith, and it is up to us to be the leading elements seeking to create the momentum that delegitimizes Daesh's claim both to be an Islamic entity, but also an Islamic State. And that's really encouraging from my perspective. And as time goes on in this line of effort, as, for example, we've had in one country, they sponsored a conference where all of the GCC states were present, as were many other members of the coalition. And we spoke in great detail about the nuance of the message and who should be saying what and how they should be saying it in the region to have the greatest effect. And so while we will have common themes, how those common themes are depicted in the region versus how we Americans may articulate Daesh both in terms of our population and to other elements within our own population that could be susceptible conceivably to radicalization and recruitment. That will be a unique national challenge, and it will be a unique national contribution. So importantly, I think the members of the coalition operating along this delegitimization line of effort are developing the common themes on which we all agree. And I think we can all agree on many of the common themes. It is how they're ultimately expressed, by whom, where, and when, that requires the art associated with the science of this kind of an approach. The most encouraging piece of this to me isn't necessarily the words that are being spoken, but this intense desire to take ownership in the region of this, to strike the blows regionally, locally, nationally against the falsehood that this is both an Islamic entity and a state. And I think there's no better way to judge this than if you listened to the condemnation by Al-Qaeda of Abu Bakr when he declared the caliphate. The condemnation was very loud that they weren't ready. They weren't ready to be an Islamic State by virtue of the things that they had done to Muslims, by virtue of their ideology. And just within this broad movement of extremism and radicalization of large-scale populations, Al-Qaeda and Daesh, they couldn't agree either. And so there is a real susceptibility here. And while we'll seek to shrink the surface area on which Daesh operates, attack it across its entire nervous system, and in a kinetic way, in a physical way, begin to shrink and degrade Daesh as we seek to diminish its access to resources, its ability to generate its own, as we seek to reduce the flow of foreign fighters to the battle space, to assist them operationally. In the end, Daesh is defeated when we have killed the idea of Daesh. And I think that's what very positively the members of the coalition are interested in, combining their respective assets to kill the idea of Daesh.
Another way to say that is we need to win the argument.
We do.
And King Abdullah of Jordan was here last week, and there seems to be an emerging conversation in the Middle East that there are Muslims and then there are extremists. Point being, these extremists are not carrying out activity consistent with the Quran and the Muslim faith.
And that's the key. And that's what those powerful voices in the region are our greatest weapon in this regard.
We have very little time, so I think I will ask for 3 people, and please forgive me, to ask questions and then give General Allen a chance to wrap up. There are 2 on the side there, but there's a woman in red. You will ask 1 question. Let me just call on other people. There are, let me just see here. I can't decide here. And dear, I'm going to call on the 2 in the front row, Mike Van Duzen from the Wilson Center, and the other gentleman from Statoil will identify himself. And that'll be the final
Marina
questions.
Ottaway with the Wilson Center.
Hi, Marina.
General,
All about the lighting.
you talked about the training efforts that are going on in Iraq now, and if I understood that they are still relatively in the preliminary stages. How likely is it that major battles are going to be forced on you before much of the training has taken place? And I'm thinking about 2 situations. One is the battle for Ramadi, that it's likely to be imposed on you by ISIL if the reports that they are closing in on the city is right. And the second is the battle for Mosul, because there are reports that elements in the Iraqi government and in the Iraqi military wanted the battle.
Okay, 2 questions in front.
I'm Mike Van Duzen, the Wilson Center. General, thank you very much. The question I wanted to ask is along the lines of Marina's, and I would add Aleppo to the problems that cannot wait throughout the winter. My real question is that we've been here for an hour, and the elephant in the room has not been mentioned. Iran. Do you see Iran as a helpful or unhelpful force in terms of what we have to do in Iraq? I know it's more complicated in
Thank you.
Syria, but you ought to comment on Iran.
Yes, thank you, Kevin Massey with Statoil. General, we heard a week ago from General David Rodriguez that the US has identified what it thinks is a training camp, an ISIS training camp in Libya. Could you give an assessment of what you see as the current status of ISIS in North Africa and the prospects for its potential entrenchment and expansion?
Thank you. Okay.
Let me hit the last one first. We're very attentive to this. It is, and I'll leave to the intelligence professionals the specifics. We are attentive to those elements that choose to depict themselves as Daesh from a distance, but in the context of Daesh as it exists with a capital in Raqqa and a distant capital in Mosul, within the context, if you draw a line around the area that they control, and they call themselves the state, the proto-state in this case, we have a pretty good sense of the contents of that area. But we're also now increasingly attentive to those organizations at a distance that seek to affiliate themselves. What I can't tell you, because again, I'm not an intelligence specialist here and I've not been looking specifically into Libya, is whether this is a camp that is set up by elements from within that proto-state on behalf of a recruiting and training effort, or whether this is a training camp that already existed, which ultimately rebranded itself from a local radical or extremist organization to simply seek to achieve a level of legitimacy, in some cases, by calling itself a franchise of Daesh. But we're very attentive to this, and we're concerned about elements within the AQIM, the Al-Qaeda in the lands of the Islamic Maghreb. We're very attentive to the potential for line crossers there and what they may do on behalf of Daesh. We know that the organization in Sinai has recently sworn fealty to Daesh. And so watching it as it exists on the ground in Syria and Iraq is only part of the broader attention that we're paying to the franchise elements that begin to expand and swear loyalty all the way from Mindanao in the Philippines to areas in North Africa or even inside Africa. We're watching that very closely. With regard to Iran, Iran obviously has an enormous presence and influence in the region. I would say that it differs for us in the role that it plays in Iraq versus the role that it plays in Syria versus the role it plays in the context of the nuclear portfolio versus the role it plays more broadly in the region, everything from the activities of Lebanese Hezbollah to its support to the Houthi tribe, which has destabilized in some respects Yemen. We would hope, we had a conversation last night at dinner, it's a very complex issue with respect to Iraq. I don't want to dodge it by saying it's a complex issue. Give me your next question. But I would say that the nature of the debate that occurs or the conversation that occurs in Tehran today with respect to the acceptance of the coalition on the ground on behalf of Iraq is a very different conversation today than it might have been 2 or 3 years ago. The reflexive reaction of Shia militia elements, which I think unrestrained would conceivably, we would conceivably have been under attack from them immediately. Interestingly enough, they haven't yet. The role of the Grand Ayatollah Sistani it's difficult to overstate the importance of his role, both as it relates to the conduct and the behavior of Iran, but also in providing support to Prime Minister Abadi and through his voice in having called for greater support to the Sunni tribes, for example, in Al-Anbar, given Abadi the space to consolidate his political portfolio, reach out to the Sunni elements in Iraq, and to do so without having constantly either violent Shia militias breathing down his back, or Iran seeking to derail the process. So Iran is a very complex player, not just in Iraq, but in Syria. It's a very complex player in Lebanon. And through Lebanon, of course, we watch the results of what could occur in Syria as it relates to Lebanese Hezbollah. And in that context, we worry about Israel as a partner and an ally in the region. But then more broadly, we look at the activities of Iran with respect to allied populations within the region as well. And Yemen, I think, is an interesting case study, because as I have spoken with leaders in the region, they're deeply concerned about their perspective about Iran's role with the Houthis and how that is affecting the stability of Yemen. And they put it this way: it's not just about that, but the polarization that is occurring within the fabric of society in Yemen is forcing elements that would otherwise never be thinking of allying itself into the arms of Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula, to ally with them ultimately to deal with the concerns over the Iranian influence with the Houthis. So it's an interesting perspective. I don't know necessarily that I share that, but that's an interesting perspective. So Iran is a key player in the region. We have to understand that. It's important for us to understand the complexities associated with the Iranian involvement, because it is different in each one of those places, and understanding how it exists in each of those places and how it conceivably could interact. If we did something here, it could play out here, is important for us. And then the issue of the specifics associated with the counteroffensive. It will be very important when we see the counteroffensive, which in some respects is underway now in a limited manner. It'll be very important that we win every battle. And so giving battle and not giving battle is, for a commander who is commanding a large field force, it is sometimes much better to know when not to fight than when to fight. It is sometimes better to ensure that you set the conditions ultimately to win rather than to reduce the risk associated with the engagement, as opposed to be willing to accept greater risk. What I mean by that is, for example, Ramadi. Ramadi is both iconic, I think, with respect to Iraq writ large, but certainly for the Sunnis, because it is the provincial center in Al-Anbar. I will tell you that just up the road, if you know the area well, I suspect you do, just up the road and to the west a bit is Al-Assad, which is one of the principal strong points still of the 7th Iraqi Army Division. And while there was mixed success in and around the city of Heat, which ultimately brought about, I think, the defeat of the Alba Nimr tribe, which really heroically defended its area. As Daesh has attempted to pressure Ramadi, there have been significant airstrikes that have gone in on behalf of the Iraqi security forces, on behalf of the tribal confederation that operates still in and around Ramadi. And at this point, we believe that we have stabilized the situation and reduced the ability of Daesh to threaten Ramadi. And we'll continue to provide that kind of support until the counteroffensive ultimately eliminates Daesh as a threat, a persistent threat to Ramadi. With respect to Mosul, I think Mosul will be probably the climactic battle of the fight in Iraq. But once again, I don't want to predict timelines. I don't want to predict the order in which it will occur. But this is a city where the Islamic Caliphate was declared. It was also a city 6 months ago yesterday where the Iraqi security forces ultimately began to come apart. So I think for one party, they can't lose, and for another party, they can't afford not to win. And so I think the moment when the battle is joined at Mosul has to be one that is very seriously considered, and that the forces arrayed are the right combination of forces with the right kinds of support so that when Daesh ultimately feels the weight of the counteroffensive, it is something that it simply cannot resist.
Well, General, let me quote something to you, something that you said to you in thanking you for this very informative hour. You said it's very important that you set the conditions to win rather than just reduce the risk. And we talked about winning as winning the argument, ultimately, not just winning a kinetic fight. I want to say to you on behalf of the Wilson Center, and I'm sure this audience, that if we ever get to the point, and hopefully we will, where we win the argument, your personal contribution will have played a major role. I want to thank you for coming this morning.
An honor to be with you today. Thank you.